Hi, welcome back to my studio at Visual Philosophy. In this video, we are going to go over proofing your etching plate that we previously put hard ground on, scratched through the surface, put in the acid, and now we will clean it off, put ink in, and pull a print. So before we get started, there's a couple things we have to do to prep for printing our etching plate. And I like to set the press up before I start inking my plate because it just makes it much easier. So this is the etching press we're using, and we use blankets to cushion paper into the grooves of the plate. And to set up the press, what we're going to do is we're going to take the roller all the way down by cranking it evenly to the right until we can't go anymore. And then we're going to equally crank up until we can fit the blankets underneath the roller. Then we're going to crank it down until there's just a little resistance. And you could test that too with the roller by rolling it back and forth. So the blankets go in a certain order. The first one down closest to our plate is the thinnest blanket, and this is called the sizing catcher, because it catches any water or ink or anything that would squeeze out. Then we have the thickest blanket, which is called the cushion, and it does just what you think it would. It cushions that paper from the roller onto the plate. And then we have the pusher, which is the blanket that goes on top and helps grip onto the roller and move it along the surface. So let's roll it all the way out, but not off the blanket. So we're still on the blankets on that side. And then we're going to push the blankets back so you can see they're kind of stuck in there. And then we're going to put our plate down. And we're not going to put our paper down yet. What we're going to do is use a fresh piece of newsprint, and we're going to put that on just over the plate. And this will test the pressure because we could see the bevel when we roll it through. So we might have to deepen the pressure, change the pressure to be higher, but we'll be able to see. I think that was probably way too light. I'm just rolling it back to show you, but normally you would just go one direction. So there's a little bit of embossing, but not a whole lot. So roll it off the plate, go down, so there's a little more pressure, and then we'll try again. And now you want to feel a little resistance on the roller, and you can also feel it bumping off. So we might have to go a little bit more pressure. And you just keep doing that until you get it right. And you'll know you've gotten it right when you see this line of newsprint embossing over the plate. And now you can see the embossed line. So that is good pressure. And now we're ready to take the hard ground off and start inking. But there's one more thing we have to do before we print, which is to put our paper in the water bath. So in order for the paper to transfer the ink, it needs to be damp so that it can spread out through the or into the grooves of the plate. So what we're going to do is fill a trough with water and then put the paper in for about 15 or 20 minutes while we're inking up the plate. And that way it will soak and dampen while we're doing our inking, and then it'll be ready to print when we are ready. So I'll fill up a trough. You really only need enough to cover the paper. You don't need a huge deep bathtub's worth. Okay. So now we'll take our paper. This is Reeves BFK. It's a rag paper, a cotton paper. So it's really, it's able to absorb the water and it doesn't fall apart. So we'll put that in the water bath. Kind of poke it down. Go back and forth so it gets a little damp. If it's just too big. So now it can sit in the water bath soaking for about 15 minutes while we go ink and wipe our plate. So these are the tools that we need to proof our plate, and a proof is just the first print, so it's like a test print. We need our plate that we're going to clean with mineral spirits and a rag, and I like to wear gloves for this purpose because your hands kind of get gross from the hard ground. And then we're going to be spreading our ink, which this is oil-based etching ink, just black, which is the best for proofing because it'll give you a nice clean print and you'll see everything that you created devoid of any color nuances. And then we use the ink knife to spread out our ink and condition it. I've also got a little bit of wiping compound and tack reducer, which is really helpful for intaglio because the ink can get kind of sticky, and so this helps it to just wipe off the surface a little bit easier. And we're going to be wiping with a couple different tools. The first one is the tarlatan, which is a starched cheesecloth that this is coated in black ink. So the more ink that gets coated onto it, the more times you use it, I think the better it gets. And then we're going to be using phone book pages for paper wiping the very end. And our glove. Open our mineral spirits. Okay. And depending on how long the hard ground has been on there, this might take a little while. But you can see how thick it is. Yes. You probably want to do this in a ventilated area or outside even, because even if it says odorless mineral spirits, it's not really odorless. You can see it start to kind of remove. And we call this proofing because this is just the first test print. I could go back and put more hard ground on this, re-etch it in different areas. So this is at the end, you know, the final version. This is just the first version, a version. So you might notice that most of the plate where I didn't scratch is still nice and smooth. There might be some areas that have a little bit of pitting. That's called false biting or open biting, and that is usually from a faulty coverage of your hard ground, or it could also be just leaving it in too long and it starts to bite through the hard ground. And then I always do the edges and the back too. Even if they're beveled, they'll get that hold that hard ground. Okay, so at this point it's clean, but it's still kind of greasy because the mineral spirits are greasy, as are the hard ground. So what I'm going to do is get a fresh piece of newsprint, degrease it with a simple green or another type of degreasing agent, and then it'll be ready to put the ink on. And like with everything printmaking related, there's a technique. So when you get ink in a can, you don't want to just gouge it out because that'll create a lot more surface area to dry out. So what you want to do is just barely spin your flat ink knife on the top, on the surface. So you're just skimming the surface and you get plenty of ink. And ink has different properties, one of which is it's thixotropic. So the more it sits, the thicker it gets. So put that down, and we're going to work it with our ink knife. So I put it on the glass so it's easier to clean up and spread. And I'm just going to pull it, turn my ink knife over, scrape it up, pull it back down. So I'm kind of working it and elongating the molecules so that it's a little bit more plastic and stretchy. Just waking it up. And I do this with every type of ink, not just etching ink. Okay. And to spread the ink onto the surface, I've cut these pieces of mat board or the backs of sketchbooks. And I'm just going to grab a little ink, and then I'm going to systematically ink up. I don't really have to go here if I don't want to, because I'm just going to end up wiping it off. But if there was image covering the whole area, you'd want to go top to bottom all the way down. And what I'm doing is using the cardboard to push the ink into the grooves. So at this point, we've covered the area, and the advantage of having everything covered, regardless of whether you're going to be wiping it off or not, is that you can spot wipe and determine if you want a little bit of tone, and you can determine whether you want to keep some of that as tonal background. Now I'm going to grab my tarlatan, and I like to cut a really big piece of tarlatan. Sometimes you can get it on a roll. So I cut a fairly large piece because I kind of ball it up, and then it can fit like a little pad in my hand. I don't like using tiny scraps because I feel like it pulls out more ink than it actually just wipes off. So you want to leave the ink in the grooves and just wipe off the surface. So we're going to take our tarlatan pad and we're going to make very light circular motions. So I'm using really light circular motions to just swipe. I'm not pushing into the plate because that would remove the ink in the grooves. I'm just swiping. It's like a wisp on the surface. So as your plate gets a little bit less full of ink. You can move to an area on the tarlatan that's got less ink on it, and then continue to wipe until you've gotten most of it off, till there's, well, that's not very good, till there's not a lot that's transferring off of the plate. And notice how easy this one wiped. This is a brand new can of Charbonnel, which is a really nice ink for etching. I didn't have to use any of the wiping compound because this color is not very tacky. And if you notice that your ink is really sticky and you're not able to wipe as well, add some of that. So now we're going to move to our paper. I like the newsprint and the phone book pages because they're really lightweight, but they hold a lot of ink. So I'm just, again, I'm not wiping and pushing, I'm just sort of letting it do the work. I'm just sort of rubbing off the surface. And I don't have to do that everywhere. If I wanted some parts to remain a little darker, then I don't have to wipe off those areas. But the more I wipe with the paper, the whiter it's going to get when I print, because I'm removing all that tone. Place my plate on the press after it's been cleaned and wiped, and now I go wash my hands, and then I can take the paper out. We'll bring the paper over and then we'll roll it through the press and pull our print. So our paper has been soaking. My hands are clean because you don't want to get black ink splotches. Just gonna let it drip. Then I'll take it over to the towel. Lay it down. Just a regular old towel, clean. And I'm just gonna blot. Some people like blotting papers, but I find those get kind of saturated, so just a clean towel. Great. And then you lift it up, and you just don't want to see water spots. You want it to be damp, but not, you know, invisible water on the surface. So now that we've tested the pressure, we're all good. We don't need to monkey around with that. The paper does have a right side and a wrong side. The right side is a little bit rougher of this type of paper, and the wrong side has a little bit more of that machined type of look from the screen that it was made on. And I'm just going to, because this is a test print, I don't have to register it exactly. I'm just going to kind of guesstimate. But you could make a template if you wanted to be exact. Make your even borders. And then I'm going to put a piece of newsprint, clean newsprint down, because I don't want any of the ink squeezing out or transferring onto my blankets. I'm going to roll my blankets down carefully. And then I'm going to roll it through the press. Again, I leave the blankets kind of wedged in there. Pull them back. Pull my newsprint back. My paper is still stuck. I can go a little bit more. And then peel back the print. And then assess what I've got. So this print looks a little light. It looks like I probably either wiped out too much, over wiped, or I under etched. So there might be not deep enough lines to hold the ink. So what I might do is put another coat of hard ground on the plate, re-etch some of those lines, or do some aqua tinting, but this is why we call it a proof, so you can see what you've got for your first draft. So to clean up, we basically do what we did when we cleaned off the hard ground. We get our rag, we get our mineral spirits. There's not a lot of ink on here. If there was more ink, we might start with an oil, like a baby oil. But because there's not that much, I don't really need to worry about it. Just get a little mineral spirits, because this is oil-based ink. If you're using a water-soluble oil-based ink, you can use water and soap. But you can see there was still some ink. It could also be pressure, that if you're noticing a lot of ink coming out of your plate, then you might, light print might indicate lack of pressure. So there's 3 different variables that we can kind of play around with. I'm going to get all the ink out of the surface before we put another layer of hard ground on. And then we definitely want to degrease it before we put hard ground on. Otherwise the hard ground won't stick. So put some newsprint down. So you can, if you had another piece of paper soaking, you could pull another test print, and you could just, without cleaning it, you could just re-ink, get a new piece of cardboard, re-ink it, re-wipe it, maybe a little bit less wiping, and print again. And you can just keep printing that way if you wanted to mitigate the variables. You know, increase the pressure, decrease the wiping, and then you would know exactly what you had. Okay, now we're ready to put the hard ground on if that's what we want. And I just take the blankets out of my press when I'm done to finish that and crank it back down to the bed so it's ready to go for next time.